He will be starting soon. Oh, story time with Mr. Lamada, where all your dreams come true. Oh, he brings to life your favorite stories with a great big smile. You won't leave lonely. Won't you start all the reading? I just can't wait to be hearing story time with Mr. Lamada. He will be starting soon. Oh, story time with Mr. Lamada, where all your dreams come true. Oh, he brings to life your favorite stories with a great big smile. You won't leave lonely. Won't you start all the reading? I just can't wait to be hearing.
Good evening and welcome to Story Time. Thank you for joining me. I hope you're ready. Happy Halloween wherever you're joining us from. And of course, we have a special book today, Grown Up Story Time, Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories. I hope you're ready for this one. It is a creepy one, and we'll be reading one in particular from this one. Thank you for joining us. If you're joining us, of course, from the East Coast, I know this one is for you. It is late out there, and later on, of course, we'll have round 2 for today with continuing with the same book, more scary stories. Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories. Are you ready to be creeped out? Are you ready to be scared? Thank you for joining me. I'm glad you're here. I hope you've had a lovely weekend, a weekend of celebrating, of course, and hopefully not too much candy, but I am glad we're here for a wonderful, creepy story together. Thank you for joining in. And this one is published by Farrar, Strauss, and Giroux, an imprint of MacMillan Publishing. A big thank you to them as we read an excerpt from this wonderful book indeed. Thank you so much for joining in. Get comfortable, get cozy. It will be a creepy one indeed. Thank you for being here. Absolutely love that we're here for a great story together, and we'll be getting started. Thank you so much for joining in today. Please, as always, let me know where you're joining in from and who is joining in with you. Happy Sunday, a good story on a Sunday evening. Thank you so much for being here, or depending on where you're joining us, this is probably a daytime story for you. But good morning to you and welcome to Story Time. Thank you so much for joining in. Do tell me too, what are your favorite scary stories? And can you share those with us so that we can definitely try and bring them for next time? Thank you. And adults, if you do love this adult story time, maybe we can think of bringing it back sooner than next Halloween. Thank you so much for being here. Let us see who is with us this evening saying hello to you. How are you doing? Thank you so much for joining in. Thank you. Bedtime story. It's 9 p.m. Yes, 9 p.m. on the East Coast. And please do remember that this one is tailored to the adults. Yes, the book is written for 12 and above. So please do bear that in mind if you're joining in with us. We do not want to scare our little ones too much. But thank you for being here. Aurelia Lee, appreciate you. Thank you for being here. Andres, you're excited. You're brave. You're a brave soul for being here. Thank you so much for joining in. Absolutely love it. Thank you. And good morning to you. Oh, is it good evening? See, now I'm thinking morning. Good evening to you, Chrissy. How are you doing? Say happy Halloween. Hello from Chrissy and Teddy. Well, thank you so much for joining us in rainy Vermont. Yes, it sounds like the perfect setting for this wonderful story that we have today. And of course, Bowden, sleep well, my friend. Thank you so much for joining in Story Time. Have a good night, sweet dreams. Thank you for joining in. All right, we'll be getting started very shortly. Thank you so much for joining in. I cannot wait to begin with this one. Please get ready, get comfortable. Rainy Vermont, here we come with another lovely story. And here we go. Join me on the other side of this short break. Thank you for joining in. All right, I'll catch you on the other side.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Davis. I'm a children's book author, illustrator, and high school art educator. I am the author of 30,000 Stitches, the inspiring story of the National 9/11 flag, illustrated by Sally Warren Comport and published with Worthy Kids Hachette Book Group. One thing that drew me to writing 30,000 Stitches was the idea that people from all different communities came out to stitch this flag and make it whole again. So I hope that when people read 30,000 Stitches, they remember the power of sharing our stories. When people came out to stitch the flag, they shared their stories, whether about loss or pain or love. We all have stories to tell, and by sharing our stories and listening to one another's stories, we can create a better understanding of each other and create a sense of connection and unity. And this is what creates a more inclusive world. I hope you enjoy your story time with Mr. LaMotta. Bye, everybody.
All right, welcome back, and we're going to get started. Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories. I hope you're ready for this one. Here we go. And remember too that this one is published by Farrar, Strauss, and Giroux, an imprint of MacMillan Publishing. Thank you so much to them for allowing us to share this one on Storytime. Are you ready? All right, so we're going to be reading. This book is called Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories, and we're going to pick one in particular from this one, and we're going to be reading this one called Harry. Oh yes, Harry. We're going to be reading one called Harry, and this one is written by let me just bring up Harry right here, and of course this one is written by Rosemary Timperley. Are you ready? All right, here we go. Such ordinary things make me afraid. Sharp shadows on grass, white roses, children with red hair, and the name Harry. Such an ordinary name. Yet, the first time Kristin mentioned the name, I felt a premonition of fear. She was 5 years old, due to start school in 3 months' time. It was a hot, beautiful day, and she was playing alone in the garden, as she often did. I saw her lying on her stomach in the grass, picking daisies and making daisy chains with laborious pleasure. The sun burned on her pale red hair and made her skin look very white. Her big blue eyes were wide with concentration. Suddenly, she looked towards the bush of white roses, which cast its shadows over the grass, and smiled. Yes, I am Kristin, she said. She rose and walked slowly towards the bush, her little plump legs defenseless and enduring beneath the too short blue cotton skirt. She was growing fast. With my mommy and daddy, she said clearly. Then, after a pause, oh, but they are my mommy and daddy. She was in the shadow of the bush now. It was as if she'd walked out of the world of light into darkness. Uneasy, without quite knowing why, I called her. Chris, what are you doing? Nothing. The voice sounded too far away. Come indoors now. It's too hot for you to be out there. Not too hot. Come indoors, Chris. She said, I must go now. Goodbye. Then walked slowly towards the house. Chris, who were you talking to? Harry, she said. Who's Harry? Harry? I couldn't get anything else out of her, so I just gave her some cake and milk and read to her until bedtime. As she listened, she stared out at the garden. Once she smiled and waved. It was a relief finally to tuck her up in bed and feel she was safe. When Jim, my husband, came home, I told him about the mysterious Harry. He laughed. Oh, she started that lark, hasn't she? What do you mean, Jim? It's not very rare for only children to have an imaginary companion. Some kids talk to their dolls. Chris has never been keen on her dolls. She hasn't any brothers or sisters. She hasn't any friends her own age, so she imagines someone. But why has she picked that particular name? Why Harry? He shrugged. You know how kids pick things up. I don't know what you're worrying about. Honestly, I don't. Huh, nor do I. Nor do I. It's just that I feel extra responsible for her health, and everything. More so than if I were her real mother. I know, but she's all right. Chris is fine. She's a pretty young girl, healthy, intelligent little girl, and credit to you. And to you. In fact, we are thoroughly nice parents and so modest. We laughed together and he kissed me. I felt consoled until next morning. Again, the sun shone brilliantly on the small bright lawn and white roses. Kristen was sitting on the grass, cross-legged, staring towards the rose bush, smiling. Hello, she said. I hoped you'd come because I like you. How old are you? I am only 5 and a piece. I am not a baby. I am going to school soon, and I shall have a new dress, a green one. Do you go to school? What do you do then? She was silent for a while, nodding, listening, absorbed. I felt myself going cold as I stood there in the kitchen. Don't be silly. Lots of children have an imaginary companion, I told myself desperately. Just carry on as if nothing were happening. Don't listen. Don't be a fool. But I called Chris in earlier than usual for her mid-morning milk. Your milk's ready, Chris. Come along. In a minute. This was a strange reply. Usually she rushed in eagerly for her milk and the special sandwich cream biscuits, over which she was a little gourmand. Come now, darling, I said. Can Harry come too? No. The cry burst from me harshly, surprising me too. Goodbye, Harry. I'm sorry you can't come in, but I've got to have my milk, Chris said, then ran towards the house. Why can't Harry have some milk too? She challenged me. Who is Harry? Who is Harry, darling? Harry's my brother. But Chris, you haven't got a brother. Daddy and Mommy have only one child, and that's you. Harry can't be your brother. Harry's my brother. He says so. She bent over the glass of milk and emerged with a smeary top lid. Then she grabbed at the biscuits. At least Harry hadn't spoiled her appetite. After she'd had her milk, I said, we will go shopping now, Chris. You'd like to come to the shops with me, wouldn't you? I want to stay with Harry. Well, you can't. You're coming with me. Can Harry come too? No. My hands were trembling as I put on my hat and gloves. It was chilly in the house nowadays, as if there was a cold shadow over it in spite of the sun outside. Chris came with me meekly enough, but as we walked toward the street, she turned and waved. I didn't mention any of this to Jim that night. I knew he would only scoff as he had done before. But when Kristen's Harry fantasy went on day after day, it got more and more on my nerves. I came to hate and dread those long days, those long summer days. I longed for gray skies and rain. I longed for the white roses to wither and die. I trembled when I heard Kristen's voice prattling away in the garden. She talked quite unrestrainedly to Harry now. One Sunday, when Jim heard her at it, he said, I will say one thing for imaginary companions. They help a child on with her talking. Chris is talking much more freely than she used to. With an accent, I blurted out. An accent? Yeah, a slight Cockney accent. My dearest, every London child gets a slight Cockney accent. It will be much worse when she goes to school and meets lots of other kids. We don't talk Cockney. Where does she get it from? Who can he be getting it from except... And before I could say Harry, I caught myself. I couldn't quite say his name. The baker, the milkman, the dustman, the coalman, the window cleaner. Want any more? I suppose not. I laughed ruefully. Jim made me feel foolish. Anyway, said Jim, I haven't noticed any cockney in her voice. There isn't when she talks to us. It's only when she's talking to him. To Harry, you know, I'm getting quite attached to young. I'm getting quite attached to young Harry. Wouldn't it be fun if one day we looked out and saw him? Don't, I cried. Don't say that. It's my nightmare, my waking nightmare. Oh, Jim, I can't bear it much longer. He looked astonished. This Harry business is really getting you down, isn't it? Of course it is. Day in, day out, I hear nothing but Harry this, Harry that, Harry says, Harry thinks. Can Harry have some? Can Harry come too? It's all right for you out at the office all day, but I have to live with it. I am afraid. I'm afraid of it, Jim. It's so queer. Do you know what I think you should do to put your mind at ease? What? Take Chris along to see Dr. Webster tomorrow. Let him have a little talk with her. Do you think she's ill in the mind? Good heavens, no. But when we come across something that's a bit beyond us, it's well to take professional advice. Next day, I took Chris to see Dr. Webster. I left her in the waiting room. While I told him briefly about Harry, he nodded sympathetically, then said, It's a fairly unusual case, Mrs. James, but by no means unique. I've had several cases of children's imaginary companions becoming so real to them that the parents get the jitters. I expect she's rather a lonely little child, isn't she? She doesn't know any other children. We are new to the neighborhood, you see, but that will be put right when she starts school. And I think you will find that when she goes to school and meets other children, these fantasies will disappear. You see, every child needs company of her own age, and if she doesn't get it, she invents it. Older people who are lonely talk to themselves. That doesn't mean they are crazy, just that they need to talk to someone. A child is more practical. Seems silly to talk to oneself, she thinks, so she invents someone to talk to. I honestly don't think you have anything to worry about. That's what my husband says. I am sure he does. Still, I will have a chat with Kristen, as you've brought her. Leave us alone together. I went to the waiting room to fetch Chris. She was at the window. She said, Chris, Harry's waiting. Where's Chris? Where, Chris? I said quietly, wanting suddenly to see with her eyes. There, by the rose bush. The doctor had a bush of white roses in his garden. There's no one there, I said. Chris gave me a glance of unchildlike scorn. Dr. Webster wants to see you now, darling, I said shakily. You remember him, don't you? You remember him, don't you? Well, he's the one he gave you sweets when you were getting better from chicken pox. Yes, she said, and went willingly enough to the doctor's surgery. I waited restlessly. Faintly, I heard their voices through the wall, heard the doctor's chuckle, Kristen's high peal of laughter. She was talking away to the doctor in a way she didn't talk to me. When they came out, he said, Nothing wrong with her, whatever. She's just an imaginative little monkey. A word of advice, Mrs. James. Let her talk about Harry. Let her become accustomed to confiding in you. I gather you've shown some disapproval of this brother of hers, so she doesn't talk much about him to you. He makes wooden toys, doesn't he, Chris? Yes, Harry makes wooden toys. And he can read and write, can't he? Yes, and swim and climb trees and paint pictures. Harry can do everything. He's a wonderful brother. Her little face flashed with adoration. The doctor patted me on the shoulder and said, Harry sounds like a very nice brother, older brother for her. He's even got red hair like you, Chris, hasn't he? Harry's got red hair, said Chris proudly. Redder than mine. And he's nearly as tall as Daddy, only thinner. He's as tall as you, Mammy. He's 14. He says he's tall for his age. What is tall for his age? What does that mean? Mommy will tell you about that as you walk home, said Dr. Webster. Now, goodbye, Mrs. James. Don't worry. Just let her prattle. Goodbye, Chris. Give my love to Harry. He's there, said Chris, pointing at the doctor's garden. He's been waiting for me, Dr. Webster laughed. They are incorrigible, aren't they? He said. I knew one poor mother whose children invented a whole tribe of imaginary natives whose rituals and taboos ruled the household. Perhaps you're lucky, Mrs. James. I tried to feel comforted by all this, but I wasn't. I hoped this Harry business would finish. I hoped that Chris would go to school and the wretched Harry business would end. Chris ran ahead of me. She looked up as if at someone behind her. For a brief, dreadful second, I saw a shadow on the pavement alongside her. A long, thin shadow, like a boy's shadow. Then it was gone. I ran to catch up with her and held her hand tightly all the way home, even in the comparative security of the house so strangely cold in this hot weather. I never let her out of my sight. On the face of it, she behaved no differently towards me, but in reality, she was drifting away. The child in my house was becoming a stranger. For the first time since Jim and I had adopted Chris, I wondered seriously, who is she? Where does she come from? Who were her real parents? Who is this little loved stranger I've taken in as a daughter? Who is Kristen? Another week passed. It was Harry all the time. The day before she was to start school, Chris said, Not going to school? You're going to school tomorrow, Chris. You're looking forward to it, remember? You know, you are. There will be lots of other little girls and boys. Harry says he can't come too. You won't want Harry at school. He will. I tried hard to follow the doctor's advice and appear to believe in Harry. He will be too old. He would feel silly among the little boys and girls. A great lad of 14. I won't go to school without Harry. I want to be with Harry. She began to weep, loudly, painfully. Chris, stop this nonsense. Stop it now. I struck her sharply on the arm. Her crying ceased immediately. She stared at me, her blue eyes wide open and frighteningly cold. She gave me an adult stare that made me tremble. Then she said, You don't love me. Harry loves me. Harry wants me. He says I can go with him. I will not hear any more of this, I shouted, hating the anger in my voice, hating myself for being angry at all with a little girl. My little girl, mine. I went down on my knee and held out my arms. Chris, darling, come here. She came slowly. I love you, I said. I love you, Chris, and I am real. School is real. Go to school to please me. Harry will go away if I do. You will have some other friends your age. I want Harry. Again, the tears went against my shoulder now. I held her closely. You're tired, baby. Come to bed. She slept with the tear stains still on her face. It was still daylight. I went to the window to draw her curtains. Golden shadows, long strips of sunshine in the garden. Then, again, like a dream, the long, thin, clear-cut shadow of a boy near the white roses. Like a mad woman, I opened the window and shouted, Harry? Harry? I thought I saw a glimmer of red among the roses, like close red curls on a boy's head. Then there was nothing. When I told Jim about Kristen's emotional outburst, He said, "Poor little kid. It's always a nervy business starting school. She will be all right once she gets there. You will be hearing less and less about this Harry business too as time goes on. Harry doesn't want her to go to school." Hey, you sound as if you believe in Harry yourself. Sometimes I do. Believing in evil spirits in your old age? He teased her. But he teased me. But his eyes were concerned. He thought I was going round the bend, and small blame to him. "I don't think he's Harry's evil," I said. "He's just a boy who doesn't exist except for Kristen. And who is Kristen?" "None of that," said Jim sharply. "When we adopted Chris, we decided she was to be our own child. No probing into the past, no wondering and worrying, no mysteries. Chris is as much ours as as if she were born from our flesh. Who is Kristen indeed? She's our daughter. And just you remember that." "Yes, Jim, you're right. Of course you're right." He'd been so fierce about it, I didn't tell him what I planned to do the next day while Chris was at work. Next morning, Chris was silent and sulky. Jim joked with her and tried to cheer her up, but all she would do was look out the window and say, "Harry's gone." "You won't need Harry now. You're going to school," Jim said. Chris gave him that look of grown-up contempt she'd given me sometimes. She and I didn't speak as I took her to school. I was almost in tears. Although I was glad for her to start school, I felt a sense of loss at parting with her. I suppose every mother feels that when she takes her ewe lamb to school for the first time. It's the end of babyhood for the child, the beginning of life in reality. Life with its cruelty, its strangeness, its barbarity. I kissed her goodbye at the gate and said, "You will be having dinner at school today with the other children, Chris, and I will call you when school is over at 3 o'clock." "Yes, Mommy." She held my hand tightly. Other nervous children were arriving with equally nervous parents. A pleasant young teacher with fair hair and a white linen dress appeared at the gate. She gathered the new children towards her and led them away. She gave me a sympathetic smile as she passed and said, "We will take good care of her." I felt quite lighthearted as I walked away, knowing that Chris was safe and I didn't have to worry. Now I started on my secret mission. I took a bus to town and went to the big gaunt building I hadn't visited for over 5 years. Then Jim and I had gone together. The top floor of the building belonged to the Graythorne Adoption Society. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs up to the door and knocked. That familiar door with its scratched paint. A secret whose face I didn't know let me in. A secretary whose face I didn't know let me in. "May I see Miss Cleaver? My name is Mrs. James." "Have you an appointment?" she asked. "No, but it's very important." "I will see." The girl went out and returned a second later. "Miss Cleaver will see you, Mrs. James." Miss Cleaver, a tall, thin, gray-haired woman with a charming smile, a plain, kindly face, and a very wrinkled brow, rose to meet me. "Mrs. James, how are you? Good to see you after such a long time. How's Kristen?" "She's very well, Mrs. Cleaver. I'd better get straight to the point. I know you don't normally divulge the origin of the children, but to its adopters and vice versa, but I must know who Kristen is." "Sorry, Mrs. James," she began. "Our ruse." And before she could finish, I interrupted her. "Please let me tell you the whole story. Then you will see if I'm not just suffering from vulgar curiosity." I told her about Harry. When I had finished, she said, "It's very queer indeed, Mrs. James. I am going to break my rule for once. I am going to tell you in strict confidence where Kristen came from. She was born in a very poor part of London. There were 4 in the family: father, mother, son, and Kristen herself." "A son?" "Yes, he was 14 when it all happened." When what happened? Let me start from the beginning. The parents hadn't really wanted Kristen. The family lived in a one room at the top of an old house, which should have been condemned by the sanitary inspector, in my opinion. It was difficult enough when there was only the three of them, but with a baby as well, life became a nightmare. The mother was always feeling overwhelmed, suddenly unhappy. After she had had the baby, she took no interest in it. The brother, however, adored the little girl from the start. He got into trouble for cutting school so he could look after her. The father had a steady job in a warehouse. Not much money, but enough to keep them alive. Then he was sick for several weeks and lost his job. He was laid up in that messy room, ill, worrying, irked by the baby's crying and his son's eternal fussing over the child. It all got too much for him. I got all these details from the neighbors afterwards, by the way. I was told that he had particularly had a bad time in the war and had been in a nerve hospital for several months before he was fit to come home after all his demobilization. Suddenly, it all proved too much for him. One morning, in the small hours, a woman in the ground floor room saw something fall past her window and heard a thud on the ground. Kristen was in his arms. The boy's neck was broken. He was dead. Kristen was blue in the face, but still breathing faintly. The woman walked the household, sent for the police and the doctor. Then they went to the top room. There, they had to break down the door, which was locked and sealed inside. An overpowering smell of gas greeted them, in spite of the open window. They found husband and wife dead in bed, and a note from the husband saying, "I can't go on. I am going to kill them all. It's the only way." The police concluded that he had sealed up the windows and the doors and turned the gas on when the family were asleep. Then lain beside his wife until he drifted into unconsciousness and death. But the son must have wakened. Perhaps he struggled with the door, but couldn't open it. He'd be too weak to shout. All he could do was pluck away at the seal on the window, open it, and fling himself out, holding his adored little sister tightly in his arms. Why Kristen herself wasn't gassed is rather a mystery. Perhaps her head was right under the bedclothes, pressed against her brother's chest. They always slept together. Anyway, the child was taken to hospital, then to a home where you and Mr. James first saw her. And a lucky day it was for Kristen. So her brother saved her life and died himself, I said. Yes, he was a brave young man. Yes, he was a brave young man. Perhaps he thought not so much of saving her as keeping him with her. Oh dear, that sounds ungenerous. I didn't mean to be, Miss Cleaver. What was his name? I will have to look that up for you. She referred to one of the files on her desk, and at last, the family's name was Jones, she said, and the 14-year-old brother was called Harold. And did he have red hair? I murmured. That I don't know, Mrs. James, but it's Harry. The boy's name was Harry. What does it mean? I can't understand it. It's not easy, but I think perhaps deep in her unconscious mind, Kristen has always remembered Harry, the companion of her babyhood. We don't think children as having much memory, but there must be images of the past tucked away somewhere in their little heads. Kristen doesn't invent this Harry. She remembers him. She remembers him so clearly that she's almost brought him to life again. I know it sounds far-fetched, but the whole story is so odd that I can't think of any other explanation. May I have the address of the house where they lived? She was reluctant to give me this information, but I persuaded her and set out at last to find number 13, Camver Row, where the man where the man Jones had tried to kill himself and his whole family and almost succeeded. The house seemed deserted. It was filthy and derelict. But one thing made me stare and stare. There was a tiny garden. A scatter of bright uneven grass splashed the bold brown patches of earth. But the little garden had one strange glory that none of the other houses in the poor sad street possessed: a bush of white roses. They bloomed gloriously. Their scent was overpowering. I stood by the bush and stared up at the window. A voice startled me. "What are you doing here?" It was an old woman peering from the ground floor. "I thought the house was empty," I said. "Well, should be. Should be condemned, but they can't get rid of me. Nowhere else to go. Won't go." The others went quickly. The others went quickly as soon as it happened. No one else wants to come. They say the place is haunted. So it is. But what's the fuss about? Life and death? They are so close. You get to know when you're old. Alive or dead, what's the difference? She looked at me with yellowish bloodshot eyes and said, "I saw him fall past my window. That's where he fell, among the roses. He still comes back. I see him. He won't go away until he gets her." Who are you talking about?" "Harry Jones. Nice boy he was. Red hair, very thin. Too determined though. Always got his own way. Loved Kristen too much, I thought. Died among the roses. Used to sit down here with her for hours by the roses. Then died there. Or do people die? The church ought to give us an answer, but it doesn't. Not one you can believe. Go away, will you? This place isn't for you. It's for the dead who aren't dead, and the living who aren't alive. I am alive, or am I alive or dead? You tell me. I don't know. The crazy eyes staring at me beneath the matted white fringe of her hair frightened me. Mad people are terrifying. One can pity them, but one is still afraid, I murmured. I will go now. Goodbye. And tried to hurry across the hard, hot pavements, although my legs felt heavy and half paralyzed as in a nightmare. The sun blazed down on my head, but I was hardly aware of it. I lost all sense of time, all place, as I stumbled on. Then I heard something that chilled my blood. A clock. It struck 3. At 3 o'clock, I was supposed to be at the school gates waiting for Kristen. Where was I? How near to the school? What bus should I take? I made frantic inquiries of passers-by who looked at me fearfully. As I looked at the old woman, they must have thought I was crazy. At last I caught the right bus and, sick with dust, petrol fumes, and fear, reached the school. I ran across the empty playground. In a classroom, the young teacher in white was gathering her books together. "I've come for Kristen James. I am her mother. I'm so sorry I'm late. Where is she?" I gasped. "Kristen James?" The girl frowned. "Oh," then she said brightly, yes, Kristen James left. She left. The little red-haired girl, right? Yes, that's all right, Mrs. James. Her brother called her. How alike they are, aren't they? And so devoted. It's rather sweet to see a boy of that age so fond of his baby sister. Has your husband got red hair, like the 2 children? What did the brother say? I asked, faintly. He didn't say anything. When I spoke to him, he just smiled. They will be home by now, I should think. I say, do you feel all right? Yes, thank you. I must go. I ran all the way home, through the burning streets. Chris! Kristen! Where are you? Chris! Chris! Sometimes, even now, I hear my own voice of the past screaming through the cold house. Kristen! Chris! Where are you? Answer me! Chris! Then, Harry! Don't take her away! Please! Don't take her away! Come back! Harry! Harry! Demented, I rushed out into the garden. The sun struck me like a hot blade. The roses glared whitely. The air was so still I seemed to stand in timelessness, placelessness. For a real moment, I seemed very near to Kristen, although I couldn't see her. Then the roses danced before my eyes and turned red. The world turned red, blood red, wet red. I felt through redness to blackness, to nothingness, to almost death. For weeks, I was in bed with sunstroke, which turned to brain fever. During that time, Jim and the police searched for Christine in vain. The futile search continued for months. The papers were full of the strange disappearance of the red-haired child. The teacher described the brother who had called to her. There was newspaper stories of kidnapping, baby snatching, child murderers. Then the sensation died down. Just another unsolved mystery in the police files. And only 2 people knew what had happened. An old crazed woman living in a derelict house and myself. Years have passed, but I walk in fear. Such ordinary things make me afraid. Sunshine, sharp shadows on the grass, white roses, children with red hair, and the name Harry. Such an ordinary name. The end. Oh, thank you so much for joining me on Story Time. I hope you enjoyed that wonderful, fascinating story. It's just so many great stories in this beautiful book. And if you can get a hold of it, please do find it at your local library. Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories. A really, really amazing book, and many other great stories. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that, again, we'll bring this back sometime. But thank you for joining me today. I am glad we're here to spend another great time on Story Time. But please remember, you can join me again later on, although it will be very late on the East Coast. We will be back here at 9 p.m. Eastern time, 9 p.m. Western time, Pacific time, for another story reading. But this has been Roald Dahl's Book of Ghost Stories, and we're reading Harry. Oh, this one is a wonderful one indeed. Thank you so much. And it is written by Rosemary Timperley. Thank you for joining in. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us see who was with us and getting the fright today. Thank you so much for joining in. Catherine Gihel, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining in. I hope you enjoyed that book today. Thank you for joining us all the way out in Virginia. Have a lovely night, a spooky night indeed. Thank you so much. Happy Halloween to everyone. It's great to be able to join after a long time. Oh, Harmony Beth, absolutely love it. We are long overdue for a hangout, and we'll be getting in touch for sure. Thank you so much for joining in. Oh, Amanda West, you say happy Halloween out in Chile, Illinois. I got to enjoy a story while the kids are asleep. Thank you so much for joining in. I am glad you were here for this one indeed. Thank you. Chris Mitchell, thank you for joining us. And of course, Teddy, thank you so much for joining in today and say, oh, that was quite scary. Thank you for the spooky story time. Well, I am glad we were here together. And again, please remember to join us tomorrow when we are back for the kid-friendly story time. Thank you so much. I hope you've been scared by that one, and I look forward to many more stories together. A big thank you, of course, to Farrar, Strauss, and Giroux for allowing us to read this amazing book here on Story Time. This has been Story Time, spooky Story Time. We'll be back for round 2 again at 9 p.m. Pacific time. Thank you so much for joining in. Have a lovely night, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the story. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining in. Ola Olu Ogunyemi, thank you, my brother. Absolutely appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Yes, it's a great spooky story time. I love it. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you again tomorrow for more story time. To everybody that joined in today, you make story time what it is. Thank you. Much love from me. Bye-bye.